Hello everyone, it's DC20 here. Last week we painted this test model for Necron squad that I had gotten from the local con, and today we're going to be painting the rest of these guys. And to start, let's get to rebuilding this frankly kind of bullied overlord. As you can see, this guy's kind of been roughed up. These guys came in a Ziploc bag, which, while efficient, didn't really give them very much protection. He's been missing his spear, and really the only bit that I had was that horseshoe shape. Taking a little bit of salvaged lightning from a spare Beholder Mini and a 3D printed stave, we are going to hope to give this guy a little bit of life, even if it's not quite up to Codex spec. Now the first problem we're going to tackle with him is his missing arm. Now thankfully, they did still have the arm that I do believe was meant to go with him, even if it had broken off in his socket. Now unfortunately, this character is missing his hands. I assume that they were probably on the staff that somehow didn't make it into the bag. That's not a problem. As a tabletop ready miniature, this is not going to be something that I'm too worried about. I'm not going to fixate on small pieces of damage that are on these minis, especially when they've already come to me broken and already assembled. This helps me save two things that are very important to me. The first one is time. I'm not currently planning on making a Necron army. While it does interest me, I'm really not in the planning stages of making any 40k army. I like the models just well enough, and obviously I want to invest a little bit of time into them, but I'm not currently at the point where I'm willing to spend several hours just to get a single match in after spending $600 on a single squad of units. These guys are an exercise. 12 units for $11 with a little bit of assembly required, and in a genre that I don't typically paint. While I'm thankful to them for the experience, I'm not too awful worried about the mold line here, small fracture there. For me, this is sci-fi glowy skeletons on sci-fi glowy planet time, and I'm here for it. And after getting his arm in place, it's time to look towards placing the staff. You might be shocked to learn that this is part of a conversion, and that this wonkiness is not something that Games Workshop actually released. This happened to be the most fitting bit that I had in my collection. And sometimes, those parts that are just good enough are exactly what you need. The staff itself is a print that I had from a previous army where a model had fallen over. Taking the last remaining true Necron bit and placing it onto the tip of the spear, along with a little bit of that salvage lightning from a WizKids Beholder miniature, made for what I thought was a pretty fun replacement. I'm not very worried about how that organic hand at the top of the spear is going to look. After this is primed, everything should remain pretty cohesive. We're already looking at these models from the top down and from 3 and 4 feet away. If anybody notices the missing hand down at the bottom, honestly, I feel like they're going to have a few more problems with this mini besides that. And I'm going to be honest, even though the scarab head gives off more Tau energy, I'm already kind of liking the lopsidedness of this model. There are a few more things about this army that stand out. For starters, that miniature right there appears to have already had its eye painted, despite the fact that everything else was either primed at best or just had a little bit of silvery coat put to it. I think that this person that was trying to build these basically started, had a couple ideas, and then just left. Personally, I don't blame him. It's actually one of the few things that I find surprising about myself, but one of the things I like painting the least is skeletons. With the understanding caveat that you can technically make any painting job as complicated as you want, I find them really boring to paint. A lot of times, it's just a simple coat with one off-white color that you then dunk in a little bit of wash. And quite frankly, there are a lot of Necron paint jobs that I feel like are pretty much the same. Though, I will admit, they do offer a few different options to make things a little bit more interesting, and that's without having to glue the head onto the back of one of them. So now, after taking the rest of the parts, sorting them into different piles, and gluing them together, we're about ready to prime. And of course, before we do, taking some of the steps that I mentioned in the previous video to make bases and terrain so that everything can be primed together. For large groups of miniatures, I like to use Army Painter's spray rattle cans. I think that they're one of the best products on the market and one of the best things that they make. They leave a nice matte finish that I feel like ends up being a lot easier and nicer to paint on with a softer finish than even the Citadel paints. That said, I could see the value in the argument for Citadel's shinier paints being better for Necrons and other metallic beings. In any case, we're going to hit these guys with a Zenithal highlight with a titanium white by Golden Fluid Acrylics, and then we're going to get started painting. I'm taking a leather brown color to get a base coat and mostly keeping it at a relatively syrupy consistency, a little bit thicker than I normally would to really be able to push it into the recesses. One of the troubles I have with general ground painting is making sure that there's at least some color in all the recesses and making sure that there's not any white in the center. You can obviously mitigate this step by making sure that you put in multiple layers, which will also increase the color variation, but we're going for a pretty simple table-ready standard. We're not going to be too picky, we're not going to spend too much time on these guys. We're going to try and maintain our sanity. Whenever you're painting tens of minis at a time, all of a relatively similar model, that's a thing that should not be undervalued. Even still, I'm using this as an opportunity to learn. With one base coated that leather brown, I also wanted to take an opportunity to use some contrast paints. Until I have my intentions set on making a full army of anything, I'm going to be using these just like I would any other model to increase my skills. And a big part of that is knowing when you can save time and still get decent results. Here I'm basically trying to compare what looks best, that leather brown color with either contrast used as a wash or with washes, or just flat contrast paints. I've been really impressed with contrast paints just in general, both from Citadel and with the speed paint set from Army Painter. I then took Vallejo Flat Earth and just gave it a simple dry brush. Like with many things in this video, you're going to have to forgive a little bit of movie magic, as my file management for these videos was not particularly good, neither was my scientific method or my ability to keep things centered. We're going to hope for some better technique in the future. At the very least, I hope this at least still provides a good comparison. The one on the left was the one with the base coat, and the two on the right were done with the contrast paints. I do think there's a richness being provided by the leather brown on the base coat, but all in all, I'm happy with both of these. As I mentioned in the previous video, the nice seafoam green that I had for the power sources on these miniatures came from an undermixed paint. Oddly enough, I couldn't replicate the exact same effect the next day, and while I don't have all the footage I need to show the actual color correction on this, I do at least have enough to show you the steps. The plan is to start out with a base of vibrant greens and slowly build up the light blues. As these thin paints dry, more of the brown earth will come through in the bottom, building layers on what I hope to be a pretty fun base. And here's my first showing of the actual failings with the paint. Because I was unfamiliar with how fluorescence worked, I thought that painting a little bit of this light blue over the green would end up with a prominent showing. As it turns out, you really need to paint these fluorescent paints over white in order to get the proper color. If I were to go back and do this over, I would take the spots that I wanted to have this radioactive green and paint them with white ink. In fact, that is actually how I fix this later. Now to recommit a little bit of my own pain. I forgot that these inking steps here to make sure that I had that white base to put that new seafoam paint on required that you already painted most of your model. Object source lighting is something that I haven't tackled a ton of yet, but a big factor is to remember that the light is going to cascade on the miniature itself. Still, this white isn't going anywhere, and it'll be at least somewhat effective, even if it was a little bit of a waste of time. Time to get some actual paint on this model. I decided to take the Liberator Gold that I had used for my test model shoulder pads and bring it to their weapons as well. While I liked the idea of multiple composites, I found that they clashed too harshly. As much as I want the details to stand out, I also want cohesiveness across all these models with each other as well as themselves. Let's check in with our Overlord. Unfortunately, as I said in a previous video, the file that I had for the actual building of the space was corrupted. Thankfully, it was only a little bit of mulch wood chip, and then the crystals being super glued onto the base, and then base material put around them to bring them together. We're bringing that same Liberator Gold to his signifying armor, as well as the metal parts onto his staff. Honestly, I kinda like how this guy is shaping up, scarab head and all. Now I'm going to take the opportunity to try some things with the composite rib cage. On my test model I used flat black, And while I really liked it, I also felt like it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. I want to make sure that these guys are shining. So I decided to use some lead belcher paint on the ribcage to see if it stood out. Spoiler again, I'm going to end up landing on the flat black. I think that it ends up looking a lot more sleek and a lot less just like more silver being painted on everywhere. I think it's part of the double-edged sword of using full metallics. Even if the color is noticeably different in hue, you end up having the same level of light reflection, which makes the thing look pretty one note. Now, as much as I'd like to pad my runtime, I bet we can all agree that we've seen enough people painting metallic metal on metal plates to make it look like metally metal. Long story short, for new painters, a little bit of metallic silver, a little bit of Nuln Oil, and a little bit more metallic silver with some platinum to go on the highlights. And now we're in the end game, bringing our Liberator Gold onto the shoulder pads and last bits of armament on all of these miniatures, and then finally inking in that teal blue green. Now, I haven't mentioned him on this video, mostly because of the aforementioned lack of responsibility in filming and file corruption, but I've been a real big fan of this Deathmark. Out of all the models today, he's the one that feels like he has the most sense of identity. The large armored pads and hunched over shape makes him feel a little bit different. It actually makes him seem like he is an actual alien, rather than just a human skeleton that's been coated in metal. And I'm not gonna lie, the Tesla Punk gun does a lot for me. Now's the moment we've all been waiting for. Taking in all of that nice highlighted white spot and bringing in some actual color. Now, I did go back and touch up some of the places that I had accidentally covered up with some of that black composite-like paint that we used on the ribcage. I'm also kind of fortunate because as I was painting these miniatures, there was a wave of fluorescent tutorials that became really popular on YouTube and TikTok. And even better, they were new videos, which means that my webcam wasn't spying on me. I'm simply taking this blue acrylic ink and mixing it in with the green fluorescent paint from earlier. And we're going to use the same technique that I used to get the white paint on, using capillary action to bring it into the small spaces and pulling it around the legs to create object source lighting. Thankfully, we don't have to be too careful here. My low skill level unfortunately showed through here as I left too much white outline on each of the places where I had initially put ink. For table standard, this won't be a big problem. That said, it doesn't look as clean and intentional as it could. I could have easily avoided this by being a little bit more careful on where I put the white paint and then come in afterwards to build up a thin cloud of white around. This would more easily sell the illusion that there was a glow coming out from these pores. But the second thing I value after my time in army painting is my sanity, and I'm not going to drive myself insane just because of a little bit of white outline on a Necron that very few people will ever see. And now to give the proper love to the elite units of this video. With the rest of the models, I was happy. Generally, I think I really liked the color scheme that I liked going with, and I was very proud that the test models worked out in my favor. That said, it was these elite units that I feel like I really had something. Now, while afterwards a lot of this stuff looked a little too pale for me, so I did end up going back to give a second pass, I still really like what I'm seeing when I watch this video back. I think there's really something to a nice blue, black, and gold combo, and though these silvers aren't my favorite, and while skeletons aren't my favorite, I do think they add a nice complement. I find that I'm focusing a lot more on painting these ornaments that are decorating the skeleton than the skeletons themselves. Unsurprisingly, I'm going to remember this as a really positive painting experience. I started with just a simple goal in mind, painting these 15 some odd Necrons that I got for cheap at a con, stuff that had almost been deemed worthless, and give them a good paint job. I ended up getting a lesson in 3 different skills. First and foremost, doing a test model for large armies. If you're going to spend all that time painting so many things so similarly, it's good to know that you're going to like what you're getting into. Taking what could be salvaged from a bag of poorly treated plastic toys and seeing what could come out. The bag that I purchased only had 6 models that you could argue were lightly broken. The rest were pretty much in shambles. I ended up with a set of 21 Necrons, including these nice elite units. Lastly, I got to practice my fluorescent painting. Frankly, I feel like this was the skill that improved the least amount on this job. But it's also the one that I used for the first time here, so maybe I'm not being quite fair. Any practice is good practice, and I can guarantee that I am better now than I was then. Now let's check in for our final result. Well folks, there's not much more to say. I really like these, and I really appreciate you spending the time here. Please Please subscribe if you like these videos, and comment on what you'd like to see next.